I work for a company that's been hired by the Department of Health to, we clean all the data for the DOH, we find the data, we review the data, and we analyze the data. And to make it simple, it's sort of medical record collection, but it's not rocket science, but almost. So we get data in other ways, and we're gonna try to do more supplemental data this year, meaning the RIOs, that type of thing. I'm working very closely with RIOs, any other data source, Quest, Labs, that kind of thing. Okay, so what do we do in this? We get the data from the state, and the state sends me their provider files. Now their provider files they're from claims data, so they're terrible. And we've now, I've already told you, but I'm so excited, I built some software to help improve this process. And we improve it every single year. That's the advantage of owning your own software. And we are now able to, we API connect to the registries, to Google Maps, to the US Postal Service. And if anybody's ever looked at any data from the DOH, you know how bad it actually is. So we can take it. A lot of this stuff we were manually cleaning, and we were, Dr. Volpe can tell you, we had taxi cab drivers, we had podiatrists, we had all of this. This year, no more. So we're able now to flag all of the providers that we don't want in this audit, and flag only those that we do want in here. And it's not that their data is going to come in and it's bad, it's just a waste of our time. And we've only got so much time, you've got so much time, so let's go after the right data. And okay, so we get the data, we load it into our systems, we give it back to the state, then they run their chases, and that's what we call chases. A chase is a member measure provider, thank you. And one member may have multiple providers and multiple chases, or multiple measures. So once we get the chase file back, we continually clean it. It's nothing is ever, that job is never finished. And so if we call you, ideally what I'm looking for from the larger groups is your provider panel. And if you can provide me with an MPI list, provider panel, and where they work, then that will make things go so much smoother. And we've got, our data is up to date, but it may not be as up to date as yours is. So everybody, I will target everyone that's in this room to provide that to me, if you can. Once we get it cleaned, then we start calling, collecting data, we engage the PPS. We have a lot of remote accesses to medical records. Maimonides just lets us straight in remotely. So the more remote access we get, the better it is, because if we're missing data, we can just go back in and find it. We don't have to send somebody back there or ask you, that kind of thing. We do have this year, for the total program, because I work for 15 different PPSs, we have a total chase list of 42,000. So we're looking for around 25 to 30,000 medical records. It's a lot, and in a very short period of time. So we work, like you'll get emails from me at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. But it is a lot of work. We have medical record technicians that are trained, they go out to your sites, get the information. We then review the information. If it's compliant, that's great. If it's not, the systems now can tell us why it's not compliant. So is it compliant because the results are too high? Is it compliant because the patient wasn't seen in the time frame? Is it compliant because you're not doing the screening? Why is it not compliant? Because then you can take that information and actually do something about it. So the first couple of years when we did DSRIP, we were able to get all this data in, but we really couldn't give you any valuable or actionable data from it. So we're getting better as we go along, and we can tell you what groups are doing screening for depression, which groups aren't, who's missing out on A1Cs, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, and how to make those scores better. Then the data is sent, once we're all good with it, we send it off to the DOH, and hopefully you get your report 11 in June. Supplemental data, I had talked a little bit about that earlier, and I have my slides here, but I want to go in a little more depth. With the supplemental data sources, like I said, we're working very closely with the RIOs. What RIO are you affiliated with? Oh, thank goodness. So HealthX, we were able to get some data from last year, and I think we actually got some A1C data for you. Oh, that's right. How we go? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you were the one that helped me do this. So HealthX is, we have to sign everything away, our firstborn, our dogs, our horses, everything we had to give to them. But because HealthX had the same problem we had, that the data could come in, but they couldn't get it out. So and they couldn't get it out in mass amounts, and we're dealing with big data. So it's figuring out a way to go in, and instead of giving me a medical record, because they finally agreed to like print me out charts for the patient. But how do we get a data file with all your A1Cs, with all the information that you need, so that then we can load that into our system. We can see who's compliant. That's great. Your rates go up. Who's not compliant, and then what do we do to get on the ground to make it compliant? Do they have the latest A1C? Do they, maybe there's the screening for depression out there somewhere. So then we can just focus on the big issues. We're also, DSRIP is, I'm sure you're all familiar with HEDIS. DSRIP is very different from HEDIS. We have similar measures, but it again goes back to the stakeholders and who gets something from this. And it's kind of like, what can you do for me? And with the health plan, they're asking their providers that they pay to give them data. And with DSRIP, we're asking providers that may be affiliated with you, but maybe not. And they may, I think last year we had between 50 and 60% provider PPS affiliation. So we've got the other 40% that if you start looking at scores, 40% is huge. And so we have to convince those people to have buy-in to what we're doing. And I have a very standard it's almost very, I'm from Texas, so Southern Baptist. It gets very Southern Baptist, but I really believe in this program. And I do. And we're making amazing changes in healthcare in New York State. And so I sort of go into that with these guys and women, and hopefully they'll give us the data. Sometimes they just won't. But that's why it's a lot harder than HEDIS, because it's some of these providers, it's like pulling teeth. Also the difference is like the labs. So the large lab vendors, I think yours is Quest, they're beholden to the managed care companies, but not to DSRIP. They don't belong to PPSs. BioReference did join Somos. And I'm encouraging them to get involved with PPSs, because then they have, if I've got 900 A1Cs, it's so much easier to get it from Quest Lab, and then instead of going to each individual provider. So it's all about access to the data in an efficient, correct way. So, and it's difficult at best because they don't want to send us files. They don't. Quest made me pay for it last year. Yeah.
They'll give it to you for a price.
They'll give it to me for a price, but it took a while to get there. But so we're working with everybody, and we're trying to get everybody on board, because ideally these types of audits should be done electronically. This data moves in, everybody's got the data, so let's get it in and let's push it out in a usable, actionable fashion. So, and ultimately, hopefully with the RIOs, that we'll be able to have that, and we won't be having these conversations with me anymore. But, okay, we can move to the next one. Let's skip that, we don't need that. Okay, so there are 15 PPSs in the downstate area, and these are the measures that all of the PPSs are focusing on. And it's because this audit is it's member-based, it's not provider-based, it's not PPS-based. So if this member goes to this physician over here in Manhattan, but maybe she lives in Staten Island and she's going to be part of Bronx PPS, it's all about location and of the member. And to make it even more complicated, we try to make it as hard as possible. We assign these members to a PPS at the beginning. They shift during the year. Then we reassign them at the end. So you may have an A1C rate that's good, and if it's like 1%, 2%, at your goal, but it could go down because your membership did. And so we think we know what your rate's going to be at the end, but they're still shifting. and it's confusing in how they do the redistribution and reattribution, but I mean, it's a fact of life for us. But everyone has to do screening for clinical depression. All 15 PPSs have to do that. It's a mandate from the state. Viral load, we only have one PPS doing that, only one doing postpartum care. Lead, the other two big ones are CDC and comprehensive diabetic care and control and high blood pressure. Move on. Okay, comprehensive diabetic care. So is everybody familiar with this measure? So what we're looking for is we're looking for this particular age population that they have had diabetic care, what is considered acceptable diabetic care within the time frame. And they need a hemoglobin A1C test, and we're looking for, HEDIS measures different things. We're looking for a combo, what we call diabetic combo, which has an A1C test, regardless of the score, which has nephropathy screening, and which has an eye exam. Then the other rate that we look at is what we call poor control. But poor control is, we want the A1C to be below 9. And those are inverted rates, so if you have a 10, and somebody else has a 60%, you're doing really well, because we want fewer people in that poor control. So low rates are good for that. But again, we can't do any of these rates if we don't get the supplemental data in, or if we don't have the medical record information. And you would be surprised how hard it is to find A1Cs. And we will talk about that in a minute. But so these are the requirements for the members to be in the audit. And the eye exam is interesting because the A1C and the nephropathy we're looking for is between July 1st, 2017, June 30th, 2018. And that just passed. So June 30th just passed. We're going to start our audit in September. Now, we may be asking for information that the claims just haven't caught up yet. So we do a couple of refreshes as we go through the project to update that claims data. But we have a tight time frame to get all of this in. So we may be asking stuff that later we don't need. But the eye exam it's a 2-year, we call it 2-year look back. And the reason is that a diabetic patient that has an eye exam 2 years ago and it's negative, then the AMA says you don't need another one for another year. So you can have one done every other year if you're negative. But if you're positive, you need it done every year. So we have to, if I've got one that's done last year, that's fine, it's compliant whether it's positive or negative. But if it's done 2 years ago, it needs to be negative to be compliant. So that's sort of the rationale between the 2-year look back for the eye exam. And the nephropathy, that we get a lot of claims hits for, and it's really protein albumin in the urine and UAs. Now they've sort of made it very simple for us. We can use basic UAs. Everybody should be getting a UA at some point in time in their care, especially the diabetic patients. It used to be we had to have a microalbumin and all this stuff, but not so anymore. Okay, so the A1C testing. These are just the different names for A1Cs. And the glycohemoglobin is calculated a little bit differently. And the values they actually don't quite even out, but we can still take them. This one here, point of care, is the one we had trouble with. And I think it's awesome that they can do a point of care A1C, but where is the data? Where is it? And so it doesn't get in the chart. I know there's a little slip that comes out with the POC machine. I don't really even need that. What I need is the provider to write, or the nurse, or anybody to write that you did a point of care A1C, that the result is 8, and that's good enough. That's what I need. So I know there's a lot of point of cares being done, but nobody's documenting it. And they put this little slip somewhere. I don't know where. We haven't really been able to find them. Yep.
Can I just ask, is anyone here doing point of care testing for your glucose or hemoglobin A1C?
Salvia would raise his hand back then.
Oh, of course, my buddy. All right, so, thank you. So, you know where you guys are recording the value?
Well, it's going to Meditech. It's crossing over the EMR. But I don't know if it's
Is it under labs? Is it?
on the labs.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's scripted to say POC. I just think it's hemoglobin A1C.
Right.
So it's not-
And that's fine, as long as it's in there, but it requires somebody putting it in there. And,
Well, it's face direct.
Yeah, so it's a direct electronic interface.
oh, okay, it is.
So that's.
All right, so you're good.
Hmm?
I mean,
From 800.
Because they're really, they're reporting it as hemoglobin A1C, not as point of care.
I'm bringing it up as point of care because we lose those values. And if you've got it connected electronically, then you're set, you're fine. It'll be under lab values. It's those people that don't have the machines connected
ideally,
electronically.
what they would have to do is, like what we do manually, we used to do manually, is you would go into your EHR and enter it in as
Right.
structured data.
Right,
But that is.
it does,
And
and
that's why
it's not happening. So, and that's one of the reasons that some of our A1C rates have gotten lower instead of better, because if we can't find the data, it's not compliant. I don't care what the rate is, if I don't see it, it's not compliant. So we need to have the data, and if you can encourage your providers, the nurses, whoever is doing the POC A1C, to write it in the chart, write it in the note, because we look at every single note during that time frame. So if they just write it in the physician note, that's good enough for me. So, and it's good enough for everybody else too.
And if they had scanned in,
That's fine, as long as they put it in labs, they put it somewhere that makes sense. And we're gonna start asking people too, when we come to your sites, where do you put your POCs? Do you have, everybody puts everything in different places. So, but those are really important. The nephropathy is, this measure, nobody has trouble with this measure because we have such a high claims rate. On this, we usually get 90 to 92% hit from claims, so we can take claims data on this. And then if there was a UA, if there was a microalbumin, anything from a urine standpoint, that they looked at their protein, they can also have end-stage renal disease, things like that will exclude them from needing this measure. And if they're on ASARP therapy. So we always, if we can't find anything, then I'm going for the ASARPs. The first thing I look for is a UA, and then I look for the ASARPs.
That's good, because in general, most diabetics should be on ACEs or ARBs.
Yeah, hopefully. The eye exam. So we talked about the time frame for the eye exam, and these are really important because it's the one thing in the measure that will bring your combo rate down. And it's the hardest thing that we find with the diabetic measure. And there's a lot of things that play into it. One of them is that you don't have ophthalmologists on site, and the patient has to go to an outside ophthalmologist. We've kind of, Mount Sinai, I think, sort of solved this problem a year or so ago, and they began doing the photographs, the retinal photographs. And so then the PCP can do the photograph of the retina, you send it out to the ophthalmologist, they read it, and then the result comes back in. We need the result documented in the record, and then you're compliant. But it sort of takes the onus off the patient of having to go someplace else to get their eye exams. We found that in the areas that they have the retinal eye exams, they've gone up by 30%. And the state called me and said, "We think your data's wrong."
Right.
And I went, I don't think so. Like, we didn't make it up. And she said, I've never seen a shift like this for any measure. And I'm kind of excited about it because people started talking about this with the DSRIP initiative. And if you think that we're not doing like this is just one of those audits that you do, it's not the case. I mean, there are changes that are actually happening to the healthcare for this underserved population, that whether you provide me data, you read the data, you organize the data, you're making a difference. And I always have said to my children, we need to leave a positive footprint on this planet when we leave. And this is doing that very thing. So that's my altruism for the day. But eye exams also, we see that patients are getting them done, but we don't have them. And so, or we don't know who the provider is that had the eye exam. We're really encouraging all the PCPs, all this stuff should be coordinated in their PCP chart, and to make sure that the PCP has either the eye exam or a letter from the ophthalmologist with the results. and a letter is fine. Usually they will write a letter and say, Dr. Jones, Ms. Smith is negative. We examined her on this day. So, right? You're smiling. No, not right.
I think the ophthalmologist is down on level 4 with that.
But so it's just getting, like I said, a lot of times these are done, but we just don't have the information. So we have to see it in the chart, or at least know who the ophthalmologist is that you referred them to. So we have, some trail popcorn or something to go after to find these eye exams.
Do you find the ophthalmologist responsive?
They do. They do. They seem to be a very proud group of physicians. So, yeah, they like to send me, they send me everything. Like these crazy pictures and all, and I really just need the diagnosis and then you did it, that's all. But, yeah, but once we find them, it's just finding them that, that has been a little bit of difficulty. But again, these in-office retinal scans, if you guys don't have them at your clinic, you can bill for them, there are codes for them, they will pay for themselves, and if not from just the quality incentives that you receive from doing the eye exams. Okay, next one. Okay, so the exclusions that we have are steroid-induced diabetes. I see that occasionally. Gestational diabetes, I do see that. And so every now and then there's a patient that doesn't have a diagnosis. And they get pulled in for some weird claim reason. Somebody put the wrong code in. You'd be surprised.
Because you want metformin
Possibly.
and they have PLS, like 16
Yeah, oh, yes.
PCO.
Is that why?
Polycystic ovaries.
Ah, okay.
So the metformin is the flag used primarily for diabetes. Also
So
to
that's
keep
why,
it
because I've been finding more people that I have to push out of the study because they're not diabetic.
And then PCOs.
Interesting. And gestational the diabetics get kicked out if they don't have ongoing diabetes. So we try to be really inclusive with our pregnant ladies. So, yes, on to the next one. And it's free. I know we were just sort of set to talk about CDC today, right? But
No.
I'm going to keep going. So first of all, I want to show you these little things. I handed out these today. I didn't hand them out. This lovely woman did. So this sheet right here is, we give this to providers. We give this to. I'll get it. You can have mine. We met
Well, I think
earlier.
this side of the table
Yeah, we didn't
is
get
missing them.
Oh, okay. We'll get you some. We send these out to providers, we send them out with our technicians. This tells you exactly what we want from the medical record. It gives you the time frame. Like, for example, with the diabetic, we want a problem list because in that instance that they're not diabetic, we need to know that. So these are good to give to your providers, for your office staff, because we can tell you till the cows come home what we need. But if you've got an office manager or an admin or something like that that actually coordinates this data collection, if they don't know, it really doesn't do anybody any good. So sharing this information with them is important. We send this out to all of our providers. And I didn't put, yes, I did put the screen print. Look at that, you printed it two-sided, I'm so impressed. So this one is a pocket guide, we call it our pocket guide. It's more extensive with all the measures, but we send this out to our providers. It sort of gives you some rationale behind the measure and what we need. It also gives you the codes that we can use to make these compliant through claims. This I included. This is the Edinburgh postnatal depression screening. And we're going to get into depression now, but the reason that I include this, for some reason, there is a large population of obstetricians that do not believe pregnant ladies need to be screened for depression. Now, I recall there was a lady in Texas that killed all her kids from postpartum depression. And so it's depression in pregnancy is a very big deal, and past pregnancy. So this is a specific depression screening for the pregnant patient, and I include it because I really want people to know it's there, to use it. I try to give it to all my obstetricians, and I've been in a room before of all male obstetricians, and they have said, why do you need to screen them? Why? Had our baby. Anyway, there's just such a high incidence of, and those of you in mental health, you know. But so that's why I included that. And if you didn't get these handouts, get in touch with us up here, and we can send more to you. We can, whatever we can do to help you out. Screening for clinical depression is, this measure was relatively new. It was brand new actually. We helped develop it the first year. We've changed it a little bit as we've gone because we figured out sort of what the pitfalls are with this and what diagnosis doesn't work, and that somebody with Alzheimer's is not going to be able to give you, full-blown Alzheimer's can't give you a depression screening, and so we've increased the number of people that we can exclude from this. There are a lot of individuals now that we push out that we wouldn't have kept in there before. So, and we see that these rates are going up, but what we're looking for is within the time frame, and we're mid-year to mid-year. Most audits are at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year. So it kind of confuses people. But we're mid-year to mid-year, and we're just looking for screening for clinical depression. It can be a PHQ-2, and the PHQ-2 is, are you depressed? And do you get any joy out of life? And if both of those are no, then they're negative and you move on. And if one of them is yes, then you need to do a PHQ-9. So that's part of the follow-up. So it's not just the screening for depression, it's that if you have a positive screening, that someone is doing some sort of follow-up or has offered some follow-up for the patients. One of the reasons we started doing this measure is we realized that the PCPs are the first line of defense. And so by the time they jump off the bridge, or by the time they kill their 4 children, or whatever the issue is with depression, they're not compliant with their meds, they become very expensive. Depression rolls into a lot of other comorbidities. We found that the PCP, like I said, is the first line of defense. They should be asking these patients two simple questions, and then it moves on to a PHQ-9 if you need it. Some people are adverse to doing it because they don't know what to do if they're positive, and it scares them. But somebody needs to ask them. And I can get copies of PHQ-2s and PHQ-9s. A lot of people now are building them into their software so that you can't move on until you've answered the PHQ-2 or 9. And they need to, if they're positive, they need to have follow-up within 30 days of the diagnosis. And that can be offering them medication. They don't have to take it, but you offered it. That can be doing a PHQ-9 to see if they really are clinically depressed, and it's negative. That's it, you did your job. It can be referral to a social worker. A lot of the sites, I think you guys do this, you have social workers on site, so if they have a positive PHQ, they go and see them right there. And that's really as it should be. So, like I said, one of the comorbidities with depression is that it increases the severity of any other illnesses they may have. And so whether it's diabetes, whatever it is, you're depressed, you can't get out of bed, you don't take your meds, people get sicker and they become more expensive, and their quality of life goes down. So it covers a lot of things, and that's why the depression screening is so important. But the PHQ-2, the PHQ-9, there are other screening tests out there. There's a whole list of them. These are the easiest, I think, and they're the ones that we see most often.